Hello, Uggies worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, and I've got a special treat for you. Last time I was dating, which was in 2022, I purchased this Vibroplex key. It's the so-called original, which is supposedly an exact remake of the original Vibroplex key. This is not an electronic key. It makes, when you push this in this direction, it makes dits. You push it in this direction, it makes das. Okay, so there we go. We're going to take a look at a bunch of charts about its history and how it came to be. This is a rehearsal for a talk I'm going to give at Pacificon. It's titled rather grandly, A Technological Survey of the Early Horace Greeley Martin History Leading to the Original Vibroplex We Know Today. So let's take a look. We're going to step back into the late 1800s. This comes from something called the Graphic in April 1875, but it was a problem up to and including around the turn of the century. It said there's a Victorian London disease called telegraphic paralysis, or what is sometimes called glass arm. Today we would call it a repetitive strain injury. It says here, telegraph clerks will hear with alarm of telegraphic paralysis, a new malady reported by a French physician. An employee who had been engaged in a telegraph office for 9 years found that he could not form clearly the letters U, represented by 2 dots, and it says stroke here, a dash. The I by 2 dots and the S by 3 dots. His hand became stiff and cramped, and then he endeavored to use his thumb alone, and this succeeded for 2 years, when his thumb was similarly attacked, and subsequently tried the first and second fingers, but in 2 months these were also paralyzed. Finally, he had recourse to the wrist, which also shortly became disabled. If he forced himself to use his hand, both hand and arm shook violently, and cerebral excitement continued. That sounds like something, cerebral excitement. It appears this disorder is very common among telegraph clerks. In this period of time, this is 1886, okay, here's an interesting letter in the Los Angeles Herald in 1890 saying, I've been in the telegraph business for 20 years and have been troubled with writer's cramp or telegraphic paralysis. He goes on to say, I got one of the Alcock's plasters, which is like a bandage, and as I usually do in such cases, and accidentally happened to see where someone had cured a weak wrist by using one of these plasters. So it solved his problem. This is back in the days of the patent medicine. Now let's look to see what Horace Greeley Martin had to say about this in his very first patent. This is patent 732648, page 1, line 38 and on. An operator transmitting 15,000 words in 8 hours, as many do, is compelled to depress the key 180,000 times and to release the key an equal number of times, making another 180,000 upward movements. The result is that the operator not frequently completely lose control over the key, becoming victims of what is known as telegrapher's paralysis. Terrible, terrible. Okay, and it was a problem because the only keys back then were up and down. Now, Horace Greeley Martin is not the only person to have tackled this problem. Okay, first of all, let's look at the difference between the International Code and the American Morse, which is the so-called railroad code. Several letters are formed differently, the ones in gray. Now note that this dit space in here is not, you have a dit space, a dit, and then like 1.5 dit spaces, and then a dit. Okay? Normally, between characters, you'd have a da space, but not here. There are actually 4 different kinds of spaces in railroad telegraph code. And so these things were run together, like right here. Dit, dit, dit. Instead of dit, 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 it's dit, dit, dit. With just a little bit of a space in between. We see the same thing here for these. The ones that are in yellow are the same between the two ones, and I appreciate Wikipedia for having this chart. Now, here is the punctuation for the American Morse, and I just want to draw your attention to a single one. The official code for an ampersand is da-da-da-da-dit, which we all know as wait. Just give me a moment. Da-da-da-da-dit, meaning I'll be right back. I mean like within seconds. The old American Morse code was dit-dit-dit, dit-dit-dit. Now, not dit-dit-dit, es, but rather dit-dit-dit, with a short break in between. But this is one of the carryovers from the old American Morse that we still use today on the air. Dit means ampersand or and. Dit. Okay, this comes from the old code. Now, the U.S. Navy ran into the same problem, and this is a screenshot from a Navy film showing the parts that are important in sending telegraph code. The wrist, which should be flexible, and the elbow, which is where the movements come from. Not the wrist, the elbow. And the eye's important, the ear's important, and the brain is important. If you go to this YouTube, u2.be, capx, JUP, capjs, and notice that this is an L, a lowercase l, cap R, J, 5, cap D. Okay, if you go to there, you'll find a U.S. Navy World War II training film on how to properly pound that key so that you are not going to suffer from repetitive strain injury. Let's introduce our hero here, Horace G. Martin, who lived from 1873 to 1939. He had 2 marriages. This is the first, to Gina William. He had quite a few children by her, and she died. And this is Horace Greeley Martin. Horace Greeley was a famous newspaper editor back in the late 1800s, and lots of poor children got named after him. So he was Horace. Okay, and if you look at his children, this is the children from the first marriage. Horace Greeley Martin Jr. will reappear again. Here is the list of patents. Now, normally people say that there are 4 patents attributed to H.G. Martin. I've got more than that. Here's the first 2. In both of these, instead of using a pendulum swinging back and forth, he used an electromechanical buzzer, a slow buzzer, which produced the dots. Okay, and then he had a Canadian patent, which was just this top one right here, put into Canada. The 842154 was fully mechanical, and this is the one that is taken to be the original design. But there's a problem with dates. It was filed in 1906 and granted in 1907. As it turns out, this second patent had 3 ways of doing this, one of which was entirely mechanical. Now, there's a so-called missing patent that singers of the praises of Horace Martin kind of lost for a while. It's number 1,042,457, and we'll look at it. And then this last patent right here, note the dates. The dates are much delayed after these first patents. Patents lasted then and do today for 17 years. So if you want to keep that patent and keep your rights, you need to somehow reinvent something. Make a significant change, but make it broad enough so you can still pursue patent legislation against other people. This one right here, the so-called missing patent, was done to help with patent litigation against some other people. Now, this last one right here, 1445226 by Martin, was fully mechanical, looked very similar to this one. Okay, and then this patent by his son, Junior, had a motorized dot maker. Okay, not a buzzer, but a motor with a make-break contact. And then now this says H.G. Martin, but the original H.G. Martin passed away. So Junior became H.G. Martin, and this is his son's. Both of these use motorized dot makers. This is a multi-op motorized dot maker. Okay, so let's keep going and see what we can find here. This is his first patent in 1903. And in here, if you follow this through very closely, when you go to make a DAW over this way, you connect the battery through the coils and back to here. And what these do is they pull this relay over there and make the line, okay? Now, if you want to make dits, what you do is you activate this circuit right here. It shows things jammed together, but actually these springs kind of pull them apart and push on them and so on, and there's a weight down there. And this is where you get a vibrating action, but the vibrating action is due to making and breaking the contact on these right here. And then that also will allow the dots to be made. This second patent, there are three figures. Figure 1 was entirely mechanical. Okay, here's your line out with the battery and so on. If you push this thing in the dot direction this way, this would become loose and would vibrate, okay, and you'd get dots. If you push this the other way down here, it would make this contact hit there. Notice there has to be some flexibility in here, but this contact, number 16, and then you get your DAWs out, okay? Now, look at the date on this, 1904, okay? If we look in Wikipedia, Vibroplex is the brand of side-to-side mechanical semi-automatic Morse key, called semi-automatic because only the dots are automatic. First manufactured and sold in 1905 by the Vibroplex company, after its invention and patent by Horace Greeley Martin of New York City in 1904. 1904. 1904. So this is the original key right here. It doesn't look very much like the current one. There's no proper stop over here for the pendulum. We've got the same dot making mechanism and a DAW dot dash mechanism over here. Now let's look at this third patent. This is 842154, and note the date, 1907. So if we go back here to where he first started in 1904 with this mechanical one right here that does sort of what the now we call original does, you'll see this is much more sophisticated. This was patented, 3 years after, 2.5 years after the second one. Now this is my Vibroplex original. Here you see the pendulum, which is number 33 and 34 right here. I don't see any good being done by separating these penduli. Here is a very thin wafer of metal, okay, which is the spring against which this vibrates. This right here is 17, okay, and it creates this little loop, which you can just see right here, okay, and this is what actually makes the dots. Now, for making the dashes, here is the actual key closure right here, okay? So you push it this way to make dashes, all right? What is missing from the modern one is the shorting key, which is this right here, which was necessary in a telegraph office, okay? Now, interestingly, it shows an attachment underneath and then to there. Today, that attachment goes over here to here to here. Very, very minor differences. Now, there's something that I want to show you that I consider absolute genius. Here is that same patent. 33 is the pendulum, the heavy mass on the pendulum. 16 is the shaft. 35 is this washer up here. 38 is this piece of metal, which is solid from this weight all the way over to this pivot right here. Now, when you are done sending dots, this pendulum comes over and hits this, causing this arm, which I've shown in the full out position here, to move over. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that it absolutely absorbs all the energy and brings this to a dead halt. Now, okay, this is a mechanical system, but we remember in electrical systems that the way to move energy from your transmitter to your antenna without any going backwards is to have a perfect SWR of 1:1. Okay, that means all of the electricity goes out, none of it comes back. This is a mechanical equivalent of that. It has reactance. Mass in mechanical engineering is the equivalent of a reactive element, and the spring here is actually gravity pulling down. Spring is also a reactive element, and what is not a reactive element but a resistive element is friction, and we try to get as little friction. So by matching the impedance of this device here to the impedance of this, it will take all the energy out of the pendulum. It'll go out a little bit, come back, and dead stops. You won't have this thing swinging back on you and creating dashes you didn't want. By the way, this over here, looking at the back of it, is the shorting bar. Okay, now I want to point out something from one of the patents that I think a lot of people would actually agree with. This construction is simple, positive, and certain in operation, and I like this part, and produces an instrument pleasing in appearance. Personally, I think it's a beautiful example of industrial art. It also says it's easy to operate. I'm not so sure about that. I learned on an iambic keyer. So here's an advertisement right here for Martin's Vibroplex. So Martin's the company. Vibroplex is what he put in here. You can see a little bit over here. It's real hard to tell if that's a 4. I think that's 1904 by Horace G. Martin, New York. Okay, and it says it's easy to learn, a pleasure to use. 53 Vesey Street, by the way, is where the World Trade Center complex is now. It used to be that at 53 Vesey Street, there was a Western Union shop, but all that was destroyed when the Twin Towers fell. And so it's now something else entirely from what it was then. Actually, it's made in a different place now. Here's another advertisement from United Electrical Manufacturing, 53 Vesey Street. The superintendent's railway telegraphs read what operators say regarding the Vibroplex. So this means what we have here are a bunch of testimonials. And here's another picture of it. Now here you have the damping accessory right here. And the dots are made here. See, the shorting arm is there. So we have all of the essentials of the Vibroplex. Now, why was it sold for $5? $5 was way less than it cost to make. The reason was this. Horace Greeley Martin was a fantastic marketeer. And he decided that if it cost him whatever, he would put one Vibroplex into every telegraph office. And then other people would see it, and they would purchase their own. And it worked. It worked very well for him. Now here's the so-called missing patent, okay, 1042457 from 1912. Now there's quite a few differences. Here is where the dots and dashes are made, right here, okay? You've got the same stop device over here. There are some differences. This was a patent put together so that patent litigation could be pursued. It said that about 100 of these were made. Now, I want to show you this thing in yellow here. It ends in a weird-looking little flat thing. Well, that flat thing is actually this right here. And this thing has been bent back. They should be closer. You insert this into the right place in an ordinary telegraph key, and then this thing will take over operation, and you don't have to disconnect the key or anything. Now, if we look at the 1923 patent, it sure looks like the same. This lever is just a little bit different. There's a couple minor differences in here, but again, this is the idea to try and extend that patent. So what we see is something that's very traditional for that period of time. There are patent wars going on like crazy. Inventors are rushing to solve problems, and Horace Greeley Martin was one of them. Now, you would say, we say, the Vibroplex is the oldest name in ham radio. Actually, it kind of predates that, and it's one of the older names in telegraph keys, certainly the oldest name in speed keys. All right, this is definitely a speed key. This is Vibroplex. Now, I want you to take a look at something. When, let's see, it was Scott Robbins who took over Vibroplex. He had also taken over Bencher, Inrad, Spiderbeam, Par N Feds, Easy Roller Control, Matt Tuner, and more stuff out there, okay? He chose to keep Vibroplex as the name of the company because it is, as he says, the oldest name in amateur radio. He could easily have picked Bencher or one of these others. These are all well-known brands in ham radio. But what he did is he rescued this brand. It's always been for sale. Here it is, the original standard, which is the one I have, okay? And it's not just sold through Vibroplex, but you can also get it at the big stores like DX Engineering. Note here the same price. And they say 5 left in stock. They'll get more. Okay, and there it is right there. There's the key. All right, so we've taken quite a trip down memory lane and have looked at the so-called original key, which may come from a patent that's a little bit for the one we usually take as the patent that the original key came from. That's okay. They were doing all kinds of things to stay ahead of the competition at that time. Martin Horace Greeley's marketing stroke of genius was to put one of these in every telegraph office, which immediately stirred up many sales. It's like priming the pump. His mechanical genius was that way to stop that arm from vibrating by making something that matched the reactance of the arm. It took very careful shaping and so on. And the Vibroplex key will only work when horizontal. And then when you do the dots in here, it will damp out that extra energy. So the story of Vibroplex and its patents is the story of America before World War I, and the rapid pace of invention, the rapid pace of innovations, amazing things that made America strong enough to go into World War I and be decisive in the outcome of the war. I invite you to take a look at these. Yes, I know I like my iambic keyer better, but this is allowed in the straight key century club, whereas this one over here, which is a little set of iambic paddles, are not allowed in the straight key because these go to electronic keyers. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. I found it fascinating to do a little digging, do some detective work, and see what I could find about the original history of that organization. So there you have it. Now, there's some charts coming that tell you how to get in touch with me reliably, and there is a chart on how to assist this channel financially, and then there's a nice listing of all the people who are contributing to this channel. And I thank you for your support. It keeps this channel going. And until we next meet, 73.